Speaker Boehner could face a rebellion, although Peter says from what he's hearing it might not be likely. Can the Speaker survive a challenge to his leadership?
Oh, I think it's there's really not much doubt whether he'll survive the challenge. I think the question is whether there'll be more than one ballot. I doubt that there'll be more than one ballot. I think when you approach the number that would force a second ballot, that's when people start backing away. If 30 Republicans voted against him on the first ballot, they'd probably recess and go into a Republican conference where 200 Republicans would beat up the other 30 Republicans and be pretty upset that they embarrassed the party that way. So I think for a couple guys to beat their chests and get 20 votes against them is one thing. To get to 30, I think, is quite another.
Andy, many Republicans have said publicly that now is the time for the party to step up and prove that it can govern. But that might require some cooperation from Democrats, who now find themselves in the minority after last fall's rejection by voters. Is that cooperation going to be forthcoming?
Well, I think it's just going to be tough to get bipartisan agreement on very many things. I agree with what Peter said about, the big things like tax reform or a big budget deal, even infrastructure where there's a little bit more common ground. I think they're not going to really be able to agree on spending a lot more on infrastructure if they can't agree on some of these broader budget questions. So I'd be looking for just bite-sized things of really basically Republican priorities where there's probably 60 votes in the Senate. Keystone probably ends up getting done. Repeal of the medical device tax. I think it's things like that. In terms of things that matter to investors, I think it's those bite-sized things that get done, not the big things, the consequential kinds of reforms that, like tax reform or a big budget deal or immigration, things along those lines. I think those are probably going to have to wait till the next presidential election.
Well, Andy, the GOP's mission since 2010 has been to repeal Obamacare. Texas Senator Lamar Alexander, he's going to take over chairmanship of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and he's made it no secret he wants the health care law gone. Since President Obama will certainly veto any attempt to repeal the law, what's the point?
Well, I think certainly it's not going to get repealed. I think Republicans will want to have that vote and to keep their commitment and keep their promise, because most of them did promise they would try to repeal it. And then they're going to go after, like I said, bite-sized things, repeal the medical device tax. They'll try to change the definition of the work week from 30 hours to 40 hours. I think they'll take a run at getting rid of the individual mandate. That's worth watching. Things like the employer mandate. Those are the kinds of things where there are going to be some votes. So medical device tax is likely to get signed by the president, repealing that, but those other things will be trickier.
Andy, Utah's Orrin Hatch is set to become chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. Can he put together enough bipartisan support for an overhaul of the nation's tax code? And I mention that because, as we know, Senator Hatch, he has been, in certain instances, willing to reach across the divide, as he did with the late Massachusetts Senator Edward Kennedy, to get things done.
Right, and Ron Wyden, the Democrat from Oregon, is the ranking Democrat on that committee, and he has a history of bipartisan deals as well. I just think that the differences are too large on tax reform. Republicans and Democrats don't agree on the purpose, the scope, or the revenue target for tax reform. Those are the big three questions. They don't agree on a lot of the second-tier questions as well, such as how do we treat income earned overseas. So I don't think there's enough common ground. I don't think it's a priority for the president, which is also a big factor. If the president's not really aggressively pushing and putting a lot of resources into tax reform, which he hasn't so far, and I don't think he's going to, that makes it extremely difficult to get done.
Yeah, Andy, I have about 30 seconds left. The next 2 years, they seem to be just a prelude to the 2016 election. Is the Democratic nomination still Hillary Clinton's if she wants it? And who do you see emerging from the field of Republican contenders?
Well, Hillary Clinton, of course, is the odds-on favorite. I think the only person who would have a good chance of defeating her in the primary would be Elizabeth Warren, who right now doesn't look like she's running, although she might. On the Republican side, it's wide open. I think a Republican governor, Jeb Bush, if he looks like he's in, I'd be watching John Kasich, Mike Pence, people like that, Scott Walker.